Welcome to the 700 Club. Here's a warning. America and Britain will have to prepare to pay a heavy price for their aggression. Well, that's a threat from a Houthi official after the U.S. and the United Kingdom launched major strikes in Yemen.
The strikes were in response to Houthi attacks on ships in the Red Sea. This growing conflict also raises the prospect of a widening war in the Middle East. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
President Biden authorized the strikes that hit at least 16 military sites in Yemen. Since November 19th, the Houthis have hit ships from 40 different countries.
These attacks against vessels in the Red Sea pose a direct threat to lives, to freedom of navigation, and to global trade in one of the world's most critical waterways.
The Houthi attacks have had a major impact on global trade, since around 15% of that trade flows through the Red Sea.
What's happened because of these Houthi attacks against commercial shipping is that thousands of ships have had to divert, take longer routes, pay more for insurance, and that gets translated into higher prices for people for everything from fuel to medicine to food.
On Thursday, the UN Security Council condemned in the strongest terms the Houthi attacks. The attacks come as Israel is keeping up its assault on Hamas in Gaza, but facing criticism from some in the U.S. On Capitol Hill, Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a resolution that could cut aid to Israel. The Senate is scheduled to vote this Tuesday on a bill targeted at Israel that would require the State Department to report every 30 days on alleged human rights violations in foreign countries. If the State Department fails to issue a report, all security assistance to Israel would be cut. And at the International Court of Justice, Israel is defending itself after South Africa put forward its argument that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Yet one more front facing Israel during its darkest hour since the Holocaust.
Well, Chris Mitchell is with us now from Jerusalem. So the Houthis are promising retaliation. How might they strike back?
Well, Gordon, they have a variety of arsenal weapons in their arsenal. They have attack drones. They have ballistic missiles. They can have about a 600 or 700 mile range. They fired one at Israel, was shot down by the Arrow anti-missile system. They have anti-ship missiles, anti-ship mines. So they have a variety of ways they can decide to retaliate against the United States and Israel or any of the shipping in the region. It remains to be seen exactly how much damage the U.S. and the U.K. strike has done on the Houthis' arsenal right now. So we'll see how they can respond and when they will respond.
Is there any danger that this could turn into a much widening war in the Middle East and force both Britain and the U.S. to deploy ground troops to take out the Houthis?
Well, that is a possibility. I mean, the Houthis are just one front of multiple fronts. You have Hezbollah in the north. You have the Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq. You also have the West Bank is another front that Iran is trying to provoke. Whether or not U.S. and U.K. troops would actually be on the ground there in Yemen, I doubt that, but I think they would have maybe a more robust air campaign to try to destroy what the Houthis have done. This is remarkable, Gordon, to be able to affect 15% of the shipping of the world. It's also sort of a de facto naval blockade on Israel. And finally, the U.S. and the U.K. responding, as well as four of the nations that backed last night's attack.
Well, we've been warning for years that these straits were choke points, and someone literally with a rocket-propelled grenade could bring shipping to a halt just by launching attacks at the narrowest point of the strait. And we're seeing it play out. Is Iran behind all of this? And if so, what is their overall plan? What's the overall strategy they have?
Well, I believe Iran is behind all of these fronts, Gordon. The Houthis have been given the weapons, the technology, the capability to do what they're doing right now. That includes Hezbollah, which is the main proxy of Iran in the region. And as I said, these Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq have been attacking U.S. bases. They've also been fomenting terror attacks in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. So they're all behind that. Eventually, their goals, first of all, they want to destroy Israel. Second, they want to have hegemony and dominate the Middle East. And because of their theology, they want to dominate and take over the world. And one other thing, Gordon, we should mention is that they're racing towards a nuclear weapon. There's been so much fighting going on. I don't think a lot of people have been paying attention that they're enriching uranium to 60% enrichment, which is just one step away from weapons-grade uranium.
That is a chilling prospect, and one I don't think we've really paid attention to for a couple of years now. At one point, it was all the headlines and trying to use sanctions against them to stop that weapon development. But that is an existential threat to Israel and a potential threat against Europe and the United States. So let us keep that in mind. Chris, thanks for the report. Thanks for the insight. We turn now to the International Court of Justice, where Israel is responding to claims of genocide by South Africa. Jeff Balaban of the American Center for Law and Justice joins us now from Jerusalem. So, Jeff, what is the basis for South Africa's claim?
Hello, Gordon. Well, the purported basis is the accusation that Israel is committing the crime of genocide in Gaza in violation of the 1948 Genocide Convention. The actual basis is very obvious. It's anti-Semitism, a sick obsession. The Jewish people have seen this before, the use of laws to justify or legitimize genocide of the Jews. From Pharaoh to Haman, the Greeks, the Romans, to the Nuremberg laws and Soviet laws of the last century, laws to destroy the Jewish people, physically, spiritually, or both, are common. Being a law does not make something moral or righteous. It can be evil. This is profoundly evil.
It's puzzling to me that Hamas gets to say from the river to the sea. The Palestinians get to say that. Hezbollah gets to say that. Iran gets to say, let's wipe Israel off the map. And no one seems to bring a claim that that's a call for genocide. And at the same time, here's Israel responding to a horrific attack of October 7th and saying, you have taken our citizens hostage, you have to give them up. And somehow or other, they're being accused of genocide. It makes no sense to me. So how is this now happening? And it's interesting to me that it seems to be running through what I would call the leftists, the socialists of the world, that they're picking this up and accusing Israel of being a colonial power and committing genocide. Do you have any explanation for that?
Well, I mean, the explanation is good versus evil, or in this case, evil versus good. But in terms of something you just said, I think is a very key point, which is there's a leftist angle to this, and I think it's quite obvious and quite symbolic that South Africa was put up to doing this because, you know, the narrative that's taking place in the West, and especially in America, and the timing of this, which is to create tremendous pressure, I believe, on the base of the Democrats and therefore Joe Biden, is to portray Israel, and you've seen this narrative all along, this is a war, a racial war. This is a war of white people against black people. That seems to be this trend. We see this all across media, academia, out in the streets, that as though the Palestinians are people of color and Jews are white colonialists from Europe. It's nonsense. And I think that South Africa was put up to do this. I have no evidence of that, but it just seems a little politically too pat. You know, there's been a lot of accusations of apartheid, for example, and many people in South Africa have objected to the absurdity of that as well. So now this is putting together a package of a narrative that claims that Israel is committing genocide, which is false, that is a racial war, which is false, and it just fits the political agenda of the left a little bit too well to believe that it's not a put-up job.
Well, they're also accusing Israel of doing exactly what the Palestinians are doing. You can't be Jewish and live in Gaza. You can't be Jewish and live in certain places on the West Bank that are controlled by the Palestinian Authority. In fact, there's signs up that if you're an Israeli citizen, we can't protect you if you cross this line. It just seems incredible that it's been turned on its head. Let's turn to the U.S. and the political situation here, where you have Bernie Sanders, who's Jewish, but he's also a socialist, and he's also a U.S. senator. And he's introduced a bill calling for every 30 days a report from the State Department on illegal actions by Israel in Gaza. I think the end goal is to cut off all funding from the U.S. to Israel and all weapons support. What do you make of that turn?
So I'll answer. I'm going to continue with what you said before and link it to this, because there is a linkage, which is to say, yes, Israel, and Israel in this case is just an avatar for the Jewish people, is being accused of something that Israel is not doing, but that its enemies are openly doing, openly calling for genocide. And I don't just mean their enemies who are terrorists in Gaza. And I mean the people on the streets of the world who are calling to eradicate the state of Israel, including in America, people chanting from the river to the sea, and not just on the streets, but university professors and people in the media, just casually talking about total genocide, eradication of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And so, yes, it's not just the terrorists, but this notion of genocide has become widespread. And then you bring it, of course, what you said to now politically in America. Let's talk about that for a moment here. Of course, Bernie Sanders has been a longtime enemy of the Jewish people and of the state of Israel. It's quite clear. Born a Jew, but does not really identify as a Jew. The Genocide Convention relates to, possibly is trying to be related here to civilian casualties in war. And so Bernie Sanders is calling for all kinds of measurements of Israel's treatment. And as we know, Israel treats the Arabs better than any Arab nation. And as you pointed out, Jews are not just not allowed in Gaza or in Judea and Samaria, Jews are not allowed in Jordan. I mean, Jews were expelled from all of these countries, and those countries no longer have Jews. But I want to talk specifically now about the charges and how completely politically obnoxious they are. If the world were to be judged, if America were to be judged even, but certainly the rest of the world, based on civilian casualties in war, let's be clear, since World War II, the average civilian to combatant ratio has been about 9 civilians killed to every 1 combatant. America does much better, but it was 3-to-1 civilians to combatants killed in Iraq, 5-to-1 in Afghanistan. By contrast, even if you accepted Hamas's absolutely ridiculous numbers, which are the only numbers coming out of Gaza, and nobody sane would accept those numbers, but even according to those, Israel's ratio is 2-to-1 or less. Historically, its ratio has been closer to 1-to-1, which is no country in the world has come close to achieving. And this is the most challenging possible situation, with the terrorists surrounding themselves with human shields based in the most heavily populated civilian areas. The world can take a masterclass from Israel in waging war and protecting civilians, and instead they're turning it as a way to judge Israel and condemn it for suicide. The implication... Go ahead, please.
What do you make of the Metropolitan Police of London putting up signs in Heathrow Airport saying if you're a traveler from the Middle East, if you have any evidence of war crimes in Gaza, please make a report? It's absolutely stunning that the Metropolitan Police of London would take that and you know, what's the possibility of some kind of action being filed in London against Israel?
Well, London, as many European countries now, and London has one of the larger populations of Jews. Paris has a large population of Jews. But London is frequently referred to as Londonistan. I mean, the truth is, it's become so overwhelmed by the enemies of the Jewish people that the police have been going after the Jews to protect the protesters calling for genocide. And no, England does not have the same protections for free speech that we have in America. So there they normally would punish calls for genocide. Instead, they're punishing the Jews, and they're protecting those who are actually seeking genocide. So the world has been turned upside down. London is a perfect example, and the Metropolitan Police have been condemned widely now for their behavior since the beginning of this war. They are not protecting the Jews by and large. They're going after the Jews, and they're protecting those who call for our genocide. Gordon, the world is being judged now, just like those empires I mentioned before, who for 4,000 years have passed laws in order to genocide the Jews, destroy us spiritually or physically. The world is being judged because their actions and their rhetoric, in every respect, are genocidal against the Jews. Meanwhile, the Jews are being, as we have been, the most humanitarian and trying to preserve life as much as possible, and maybe that's why they hate us so much.
Let's talk about the future. If the international court rules against Israel, and there seems to be indications they will, the chief prosecutor, it's amazing that at the outset, instead of going to southern Israel and looking at what happened on October 7th, he flew to southern Gaza and was investigating potential war crimes in southern Gaza. So what are the implications of a ruling against Israel?
Well, you know, I work with the ACLJ, and the ACLJ wrote a brief. Now, even though we are not a state actor, and only state actors can actually be involved directly here, we are an NGO at the UN, and so we put together a brief. And one of the things that we noted in the brief was that South Africa, in its own accusation against Israel, almost doesn't mention it at all. It touches briefly in 2 paragraphs towards the end, basically. It mentions, oh yeah, by the way, something happened on October 7th and Jews were attacked. But the entirety of it is exactly what you're pointing out here. There's this one-sidedness, and the world, again, is going after Israel. What will happen ultimately? Personally, I don't think it was wise necessarily that Israel agreed to be judged here, but I think everyone understood that the judgment was preordained. Israel perhaps wanted to have a platform to at least make its case publicly so that good people, decent people, would hear the canards, hear the lies being told by others, and maybe take hope from the truth that Israel is purveying. We'll see if that was a wise move or not. The actions being taken by the world against Israel, they'll do what they want. Israel can't really stop it no matter what. Israel is never being judged for what it does. It's judged for who they are, the Jewish state.
Amen. And let us rely on the psalm, why did the nations rage and plot a vain thing? The Lord laughs. So let's keep that in mind. He is our ultimate protector. Well, Jeff of the American Center for Law and Justice, thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for all that the center is doing. For you at home, keep in mind the rhetoric happening, the propaganda happening, and if you're concerned, as we all are concerned, about the civilian population under this war and the devastation that is occurring, the pressure needs to be put on Hamas. Hamas still holds the hostages. Hamas has still vowed to wipe Israel off the map. Hamas has said, we will repeat October 7th again and again and again and again and again until Israel is wiped out. Now, Hamas needs to surrender. Hamas needs to give up the hostages. If you care about the civilian population of Gaza, that's where the pressure needs to be put.